you are not going to grow if the pain that you have to go through in that growth journey is not as important as the reason why you want to go through that journey.
Hello there, it's me, Steve Meller, and welcome in to Growth Ready, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. On this episode, we welcome in former US Army Apache pilot Craig Coyle, who today strives to create engaged and committed workforces. Craig's experience in high-stake environments allows us to learn the importance of creating environments that push us to our limits as a way to truly learn how ready we are and find out how much growth really matters. Hello and welcome in to the recent installment of Growth Ready. I'm so excited to be diving into a number of different areas today that are somewhat familiar to me, but this gentleman's story is very different to mine. So there's going to be some wonderful differences along the way in terms of our perspectives. And I'm excited to learn. But before we go any further, Craig Coyle joins us on the show today. And as always, Craig, I'm going to start with the question I start with everybody. What does it mean to you to be growth ready?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. First and foremost, Steve, it's an honor to be on the show. To be growth ready for me, and I'm going to come at this from a little bit of a different perspective, but where I really pride myself in what I typically talk about is this idea of setting the conditions to change, to grow, to develop. And what I mean by that is I think, we tend, and it's human nature, whenever we want to, grow, change, develop, whatever it is, go from A to B in something, it's really easy for us to get so drawn to and connected to the main effort. I like to call it. I call it main effort tunnel vision. It's the sexy thing that truly moves the needle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in my experience in a bunch of different avenues, I'm sure you could attest to this as well, Steve, is so often it's the things going on behind the scenes. In the military, we call them the supporting effort or the shaping operations, depending on the level you're talking about. So often it's those things that are doing some really critical work in the background that actually enable the growth or the development or the change to take place. And so to me, what it means to be growth ready is not necessarily doing the main effort. It's critical, right? That's the thing that actually moves the needle. But being growth ready is about setting the conditions so that you can execute on whatever your main effort needs to be.
Oh, love it. Love it. Already lots of questions come flowing through, but even just your ability to really hone in on the being growth ready. And not everybody picks up on that in the questions. So we people, they gravitate towards growth, they gravitate towards ready. I say, what does it mean to you? And they make it about like, hey, my own influence. And so that's why I love the question, because it's so varying every single time. And in so many ways, stereotypically, as you are raised to be and trained to be in the military, it's never about me, it's about us, it's about the team. And so to immediately bring it to that focus on the environment within which we are working is really cool for me. And I love now that we can maybe move into that space a little bit. But before we do, this is one of those opportunities I think is a great time for us to talk a little bit more about what you're doing now so that we can then, as we go through this, kind of connect the dots. Our listeners can start to maybe connect the dots as to how you ended up doing what it is today and what it is that got you there. So let's start with the here and now, Craig. What is it you're doing today?
Yeah, so what I've really, I don't know, I'll call it kind of like mistakenly got myself into. I never thought, and this was not part of the life plan by any means.
Mm.
I was a graduate of West Point. I always wanted to be a pilot. Found myself, uh, active duty in the military in leadership positions as an Apache pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Living my dream, and then all of a sudden I fell flat on my face as a leader. And so, part of my growth journey was being exposed to this whole world of personal development and growth and all these things. And so as I transitioned out of the military, I took a job in aerospace and saw all the same issues, sometimes even worse, that I was being forced to navigate as a leader in the military. And so ultimately, I just kind of said, I think I can help a lot of people figure out how to overcome, specifically a lot of these workforce challenges. So I left my job. I founded a company that's now called Operation Lead. And really, what we focus on is helping organizations overcome and navigate a lot of these modern day workforce challenges that really fits right into what we opened with. It's less about staring at this training or this course or this tactic that we're going to teach a bunch of leaders. And it's more so taking a more objective look, a strategic look at what this organization is doing to determine why certain things aren't working. Because ultimately, our workforce challenges typically flow from the culture we've created and the disengagement that may be prevalent across our organization. And that's really what we spend a lot of our time working on.
No, I love that. I appreciate the context, and I think it's important here because, again, when people like yourself, as you put it, kind of stumble into and mistakenly end up doing what it is you're doing, and I can definitely relate to that. In terms of where you're at now, so many of the pieces in terms of what it is you're solving today have come from problems that either you have been guilty of or you've been exposed to. And it's not necessarily always the case like that, but when you come through these sort of really high stake, high intensity environments, the military, aerospace you just touched on there. It's like it's not really a place that we like to make mistakes in, folks. Like we need to be executing at pretty high levels. So if that's what you've been made privy to, then here you are now on the other side of it saying, not only can we not afford for these mistakes to happen, but maybe even deeper down, there's an environment within which we need to be operating in order to show up as our best selves in the first place. That's kind of what I'm hearing from your story.
No, absolutely. One of the things that when I was reflecting on my career in the military, specifically as a pilot, that really highlighted this and opened my eyes is I was thinking about how I was taught and trained as a pilot.
Mm,
And obviously, current events, we're recording this mid February after the aviation world has kind of been in the news, unfortunately, quite a
yeah.
bit. But, in aviation and in the military, the stakes are high, right? You make a mistake, significant consequences happen. And so in the aviation world, training and honestly, the entire community is built around this idea from an organizational perspective that the stakes are high, right?
Mm,
So pilots go through flight school. They don't just go through flight school alone, they have instructor pilots. And it's not just them and an instructor pilot, they've got peers to their left and their right. So there are all these unique organizational principles at play. And if you think about it, think about any profession, it exists in all of them.
mhm,
But a lot of times when we look at maybe some of these more softer things in life, obviously leadership's one of them. Any type of personal development or growth tends to fall into that line of work as well. We for some reason we don't put a lot of these principles in place, right? It's like that main effort tunnel vision, but we forget about all the other things that we can be leveraging to help support us be successful in whatever our main effort is.
yeah, and I appreciate it's almost like a formula that's coming together as you're talking here. Is this notion just if we are to acknowledge the high stake environment that we're working in and how easy it is to be guilty in those environments of getting tunnel vision, of doing the work, of putting that as the focus, then easily we can then find ourselves way further down the road being like, well, why are people disengaged? Why are people not motivated? It's like, well, we've all been so focused on these high stake environments that we've created that we've kind of missed something here in terms of how do we reinforce and support this in a way to where people can actually not only achieve these high stakes, but do it in a way where we can be more collaborative, more collective, and I assume therefore achieve an even greater result at the end, right?
No, exactly. And I think one of the things that we're kind of touching on, and I'm sure your audience is really familiar with it, but in the military, we talk a lot whenever we're planning a mission, for example, one of the first things you do is enemy analysis. And so when I'm thinking about growth, right, ultimately, whatever type of growth it is, we're trying to accomplish a mission, right? We want to go from A to B. Well, the enemy in this mission is ultimately ourselves. It's this journey of change.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you're familiar with change theory or the change model. The best way I've ever heard someone talk about it is through the lens of like optimism and pessimism. Because whenever, I mean, you enter into leadership or you start working out, right? Like you're fired up the first 30 to 60 days, right? I think it was described to me as you're uninformed but optimistic, right? It's like this false sense of security that everything's going to go exactly as planned.
Right.
And then reality sets in, and you enter into this world of what I always refer to as this informed pessimism. Like now you know what it's going to take, and you're in this valley of despair, and all the emotions that are associated with it. You have to figure out how to overcome, right? Like I've recently, last couple of years, started getting into endurance running, and it's like, man, when you first start a training program, and you know this because of your experience in really, really high end athletics, you're excited. But then like week two hits, and you're like, I do not want to wake up. I'm over it. I'm good. So what gets you through that valley of despair? Well, it's all these other things you put in place around you. And I think one of the most important things you can leverage is obviously structure, obviously some form of guidance, mentorship, but community. That's the power of community right there. Like when you are working out with someone and you're supposed to meet them at the gym at 5 a.m., you're going to get out of bed because you don't want to let them down. And so you could apply this principle in pretty much anything you do that's growth oriented. That's how you start to understand what types of supporting efforts you need to put in place
Mm.
to help you overcome the enemy, which is ultimately ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Whenever we're going through a journey of change, growth, development, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, the moment you even said enemy analysis, I was like, he's gonna say myself. He's gonna say that. I was just like, this is for me at least. I was like, this is too obvious. But I hope folks listening was like, okay, never thought of myself as the enemy. Interesting. So what do you mean by that? And then here you are explaining it and going into more detail. And I'd love to really just stay on this for a moment because I think this is something we've not really discussed in great enough detail on the show is that, one of the first things, just an aside, like whenever someone reaches out and says, I'm interested in coaching, but can you just explain to me what executive coaching is? I say, really, it's a fancy way of me saying I help you get out of your own way. And people go, oh shoot, I really need some help with that. It's like, absolutely, we all do. Like it's just the way it is. We are, if anyone's going to get in our way more than anyone we know, it's probably ourselves. And so I'm curious when you look back on just your journey, and you made a few sort of comments there as you've given us your journey so far of where you maybe were handed leadership responsibilities initially and weren't necessarily equipped and ready, and then you were obviously exposed to seeing it for yourself in others. When did you first notice and just appreciate that we are in fact and can in fact be our greatest enemy? Like when did that really sort of hit for you?
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. I actually have a few different kind of ideas in different contexts where it really played itself out. Number one, I would say, so in the military, in armies specifically, and as a pilot, every pilot has to go through. It's called SEER training. It's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. So it's not the most fun training in the world because you're essentially being taught how to survive
Yeah,
after.
they don't sell it well. They don't sell that
E
well at all.
exactly. So you don't really look forward to it. But one of the things I kinda realized inside that training is it's really intentional about pushing you to your limits.
Mm.
And they do it in a very, very specific way, right? They kinda limit your food, they put you in environments that get you out of your comfort zone because what they really wanna teach you is that when push comes to shove, when you're at your limits, they want to teach you and give you an understanding of how you're going to react.
Mm.
And I give that explanation because I think it's really fitting for your show and your audience, Steve, because the key, I think, personally, to growth is not just the end state that you want to accomplish. Obviously, that's a motivator, right?
Sure.
But if we put ourselves in positions and situations where we force ourselves to learn a bit more about who we are at our core and how we react in really, really difficult and challenging environments, I think the blessing is we actually get more from the process and from the failures and from the challenges than we'll ever get from the successes that we're actually aspiring for.
Mhm.
And so the unique thing about being in a position where you're being forced to understand how your body reacts when you have to live without food for 5 days and you're figuring out how to live off the land and you're trying to, prevent these people that are trained to figure out where you are in the woods from figuring out where you are, is it's not just you're learning these tactics about, quote unquote, how to survive, but you're learning how your mind responds to those situations. So it's not unfamiliar territory when it really, really matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's why I love connecting with leaders that on the side are pursuing like incredible athletic type achievements or doing several different types of side gigs or all these kinds of things because effectively what they're telling me is like, I'm not afraid of failure. I'm not afraid of putting myself in positions that's going to really challenge me mentally because the lessons I'm going to learn from that are only going to benefit me and whatever my primary goal, primary duty, primary whatever it is going to be. And you've probably seen it all the time. Sometimes the best husbands and the best fathers are also the best leaders at work because growth, it doesn't just speak into one context of our life.
Mhm.
It often speaks into every single one if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, and I know you said you had maybe a few examples of this, but I have to immediately just sort of hold us up after that one example because, something you're speaking to here, I think is really important just to now emphasize is that what you've just described here is you've created an environment that you yourself can control. That I know like everything about that experience is so incredibly unique and specific to someone who's decided to walk the path that you decided to walk. But
Right.
that being said, you're willingly stepping into it, and you're willingly stepping into it with the notion of this isn't about whether I can simply survive. It's about me being curious enough to see how I may respond once within it. And that is where we get hung up sometimes. And again, I love that you keep referencing growth, but this is the ready piece, right? This is like, hey, if you want to get ready for whatever this thing is, as you said, we all want to get to that destination in the future. We all want to pursue and find that North Star that's driving us, that's pushing us to do the work around growth. But until we find that bravery, if you will, that willingness just to say, hey, I'm actually going to go into an experience now that I know will probably lead me to a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of challenge, maybe. However, if I can just focus on how I might respond through this and not get so caught up on the magnitude of the situation I've created for myself, that's where I get to learn. And then that's where I get to position myself eventually to be ready to take on whatever it is that comes my way that maybe is similar to that, which is exactly why you're doing that exercise in the first place, right?
100%. Yeah, I think spot on with that. And it's really at the end of the day, I think what you're explaining to everybody is this mindset shift. Is when you learn, and sometimes it takes putting yourselves in some of these situations to almost hack your mind into thinking this way or having an awareness of it. But when you learn to critically capture the thoughts you have whenever you enter into whatever situation you're entering into
Mm.
and frame it with that ready mindset, then you actually unlock the true ability to grow. Yeah, I love how you captured that there, Steve.
Yeah, and that is I mean, I immediately want to just send that right back to you in terms of just learning how one may be strategic and on top of that ability to capture what one is thinking in a moment. I mean, if my wife was listening to this right now, it's like I would pay good money for Steve to capture his thoughts as he's having them, because I'm tired of hearing him say, I had something I wanted to tell you, or I had something I wanted to speak about, and it's gone, it's gone. So, and I know people can relate to that, but I know we're not necessarily talking about that, but at the same time, that ability to respond and what we can learn in the capturing of those thoughts. Please share with us maybe some just approaches that we might take for something like that.
Yeah, one, I think our wives could definitely relate on that because this is an area of growth I think we all never reach the destination in.
Yeah.
But one of the things, this is where I kind of put my pilot hat back on, because one of the things that pilots are trained to do is exactly that. It's this idea of awareness. And I kind of go through this idea of a pre-flight routine, because really what a pre-flight routine is, yes, we have our checklist, and yes, we're checking to make sure all the screws, nuts, and bolts are where they need to be before we take off. But it's actually a whole lot more than that. When it is, the intent of a pre-flight is to make sure that you are setting the conditions for success for every mission that you go on. And it starts from whatever mission you're given and it flows all the way down. The last thing you do when you enter the cockpit is you're supposed to ask yourself and your co-pilot, am I ready for this mission?
Mm.
Right? Did I get the rest that I need to be fully present in the cockpit? Do I have a full understanding of not only what I need to accomplish, but how I'm going to accomplish that and how all the pieces are going to mix together and fit together in order to make that happen? And I'm going to bring that back to the question you asked about creating that awareness is
Mm.
sometimes, especially when we're given awareness into areas of our world where we need to grow our awareness, one of the best things we can do is find different ways that we can remind ourselves to be aware of those moments, right? It's like a little mental hack. I know a lot of people that will use their phone and put reminders on their phone for when they hit a certain point of the day or pull back into their driveway. There's so many different things you could do with your phone to remind you and hack you into a certain awareness or a certain mindset of things. One of the things that I used to do as a company commander in the military is whenever somebody would walk into my office, I would sit on my hands. It was like this physical posture task that I did
Mhm.
that would cue my mind into forcing me to be an active listener in the conversation. Because I mean, you get it as an entrepreneur, it's pretty similar. Like there's always thousands of things on your plate to do, right? And if I didn't sit on my hands, what I would find is all of a sudden my mind would slowly start shifting back to the keyboard, to my email, to the thing I have to do. And then I'm not being present with the person that's across the table from me
Mhm.
in the room, right? So I always like to encourage people like, what is something you can do that's like sitting on your hands, right? Or maybe it's taking a breath. Maybe it's a moment in the day when you pull into a parking spot or pull into your driveway where you physically cue yourself in to that type of awareness. It's a hack that's worked for me, and I know it's worked for a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the why behind why we're doing it. Again, when it's not just as simple as, hey, you know, in this moment right now, I just want to make sure I'm actively listening. There's more and more to it as well. And as you just alluded to there, like what is your version of sitting on your hands? Why is it you choose to do it? And keeping that in mind at all times, because there will be times where we don't want to do it, or we forget to do it. And the best way for us to maybe be mindful or remind ourselves is to get to the heart of the why behind it, like why we're doing it in the first place. I think that is so powerful. And again, even going back a point before that you made around just that need to set the conditions for success. It's something that I almost said until I was blue in the face when I used to coach athletes. It's just like they don't realize sometimes. It's just like we're not just training for the sake of training. It's something I said from the outset when I first moved to the United States, because we don't call it practice in the UK. We call it training.
Yeah.
Here we call it practice. I'm like, the beautiful thing about that word is it's practice to perform. We call it practice for a reason. So if we don't create conditions for us to perform in practice, then are we really practicing? And that goes to every single component of what we do before practice, what we do during, what we do after. Same that you're speaking to here when it comes to a flight. And those lessons still hold true today, especially in the corporate space. And this is where I really want to now transfer over into the specifics of the spaces that you're operating in now,
Yeah.
because I know it's not just in any and everywhere in terms of people that will say yes. There's some specific areas that you're focused in on in terms of the work that you do that I think people will notice the alignment with the world that you're coming from as well,
Right.
from military and aerospace. So with that in mind, I would just really love for you now to just provide us how you're really implementing these insights around the importance of the conditions we operate in now in the space that you're operating in terms of the clients that you serve today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my background, obviously aerospace, and that lends itself to the broader context of the manufacturing industry. But what's really unique is especially with the advancements in technology, and then also the advancements just in the greater industry that employs a lot more of that kind of skilled and unskilled labor workforce. There's a lot of transition and a lot of change happening within that entire environment. And if you think about it, obviously, there's a ton of different areas of the country and the world that are increasing dramatically what the minimum wage is, which forces a lot of these manufacturing companies to have to adjust what they're doing. And then there's also a lot of organizations that maybe use slightly less skilled labor, but are paying a lot more because they're just behemoths in the industry. I'm talking people like Amazon, I'm talking people like Tesla or SpaceX. And so there's a lot more competition within these industries when it comes to workforce related challenges than there ever has been. And so how manufacturing companies typically operate is it's this big numbers game, right? As long as we can throw money at the problem and it solves it, or at least does a good enough job to where we're still hitting our numbers, everything's okay. And what some of these companies are actually starting to see now is that they're losing people that they can't fill the gap because they're not just losing people to a competitor, they're losing people to a different market. And as the available labor force kind of continues to shrink, more and more of these companies are starting to really figure out they have to address this core component of their business differently. And one of the things I really encourage them to think about is this idea of employee engagement.
Mhm.
Because I would argue when we talk and look at our workforce, any company above 50 employees or so, engagement is going to be the lead measure, if you will, towards a lot of our more generic or more standard workforce related KPIs of production, efficiency. It could be WIP, it could be quality metrics that you're looking at, all these different things. Turnover is a huge one. And my argument is that engagement is the fruit, or it's often the byproduct of the relationship that is developed between the individual and their first line supervisor. What I mean by that is the supervisor has the direct ability to infuse purpose and clarity and impact into a specific individual's life. But so often that doesn't happen.
Mm.
And the fruit of that is a lot of the disengagement that we have to navigate in the workforce today. And so, how do we create an environment where we're building up these frontline leaders to collectively, not on a case by case isolated individual instance, but collectively create an environment that raises engagement across the board? Because then what it's going to do in an organization, it's going to separate them from everybody else in the market.
Mhm.
And they're going to be this city on a hill, if you will, that people are running to because they love working there. They may not get paid the most,
Right.
but they love working there. They feel purpose, they feel impact, they feel like they're on mission, and that changes everything. Now, the
Mhm.
challenge is, and this is kind of where our whole conversation comes into play, is how do you do that if you're not setting the conditions in your organization that encourage it? I wouldn't even say encourages, that makes every single leader in your organization crave showing up to that training. They have to be a part of it. They love it. They
Yeah.
want to grow. They want to become this leader that can do that. Because quite honestly, Steve, most organizations don't do that. They just throw the training at them.
Sure.
And that's having what I like to call the main effort tunnel vision or blindness, like we talked about.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for all that. It's awesome insight. And the one thing I'm always trying to do with this more sort of macro description when we talk about that whole organization is like, how do we bring this all the way back now to the individual? And I think you were just alluding to it there towards the end is, again, if we as individuals can create those conditions for ourselves to have around us, whether it be the environment or the people, however you want to look at it, that we need on us in order to grow, then the question becomes how how persistent are we going to be about ensuring that each individual that we are engaging with in that environment is reciprocal in terms of the investment they have in that relationship. And I heard that there in that example with the relationship between the employee and that first line supervisor. It's like, okay, who's your version of that, right? As an individual in life, like again, I blessed to say that my spouse is as close to that as I have. If not, that's
Right.
probably it. And then in addition to that, I have a few other go-to people to use that word that you used earlier as well. It's a word that I love is community. Is what is that community in my world that allows for me to feel as though I have the environment I need to be successful. But when we talk about engagement, we're almost putting it at this optimal now. We're saying like engagement is this, as you said, this byproduct, this fruit that we get to just appreciate and enjoy if we get all these other pieces in place first. Am I understanding that right?
Exactly, exactly. What I kind of like to liken it to is if our main effort in, and we'll call it specifically here, in creating an environment within an organization that's got high engagement, if that's
Mm,
our main effort, well then what's the supporting efforts that need to be around it in order to see that actually come to life, right?
yeah.
And you alluded to it exactly. There's the way I see it, there's always some form of these three supporting or shaping efforts. One, there's structure, right? So like for example in athletics, like when you were coaching your athletes, you had a clear training plan that you guys were using. Like
Mhm.
there's almost always a very clear plan in place. So that's critical. The second piece is there's guidance, right? So there are very like people that are experts in that plan and will coach you through that plan. But the third piece, and arguably the most important when it's infused with the other three pieces, or other two pieces rather, is the idea of community. Because community is what helps each and every one of us go through that structure and fully embrace the full intent and ability of that guidance. It brings it all to fruition, right? It's like in the military, whenever we were doing training exercise, we would always, you could put your rifles away and kind of leave them and not have to hold it and carry it everywhere you go, right? But you never want to just put it in the dirt. You kind of create this little like teepee of rifles leaning up against each other, right?
Mm,
Well, a rifle isn't just going to stand up on its own as a single rifle. And when there's just two of them, it kind of works, but it doesn't, right? But then when there's three, all of a sudden it works perfectly, right?
yeah.
And so very often it's not just one thing or one piece, it's how can we figure out the multiple different things that truly help set the conditions that maximize the ability of that main effort, that training, whatever it is, to move the needle the way it has to.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I always love a great visual like that with the little TP of the rifles. I think anybody listen to this can kind of picture what that looks like. And I think with everything that you're alluding to here as well, Craig, like my mind immediately just goes to how how easily we can become the piece in this entire thing that you're providing to us that's actually the issue. And I can't help but sort of mention that. We talked about it before in terms of how we can become the enemy, right? And so I almost want to bring that back around now because maybe someone's listened to this and they're just like, I've tried all of this, Craig. Like, I swear, like I'm vetting the people. I feel great about the environment, all this kind of stuff. And I keep looking at my growth ticker and I'm like, nothing's happening. I'm not even getting a flicker, like nothing. For me, I'm curious because I have no doubt that there must be some of those situations, especially when you're engaging with a client and they're speaking in a similar language and you're now needing to help them navigate like, well, maybe you are part of the problem.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's important for us to navigate that here too, because that is such an integral piece. Is how do we ensure we're doing the necessary inward analysis while we're doing what sounds like all of this sort of outward analysis too?
No, I think that's so critical, and I think that speaks to the power of coaching, right?
Mhm.
Which kind of falls in that, you call it guidance
Yeah.
pillar, if you will. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have anybody that's gonna call you on your you know what,
Yeah.
then let's be honest, you're probably doing that intentionally because you don't the growth doesn't matter enough to you,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's always a little bit of a gut punch. And, I have areas of my life where I'm guilty of this. I'm sure you do too, Steve. We all
For sure.
do.
For sure.
But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to really taking this ownership and control over growth in your life in whatever way it might be, right? Because one of my favorite perspectives or mindset shifts was this idea that was taught to me a few years ago of either having an external locus of control or an internal locus of control.
Mm.
And so there's always going to be external factors that you can point to, that you can blame, that are going to prevent you from doing something. But there's also going to be internal factors that you can control, that you can maximize your effort, maximize your attention towards, that quite often are probably going to push you past whatever external factors are out there, anyways.
Mm.
And so I think when it comes to being in that position, just like you were talking about, Steve, it's like we tried everything, we're doing everything you said. Well, that's when it that's when you've really laid the table to have those hard conversations, right? Those crucial conversations. Say,
Yeah.
hey, Steve, how bad do you really want this?
Mhm.
Right? Like how much does it matter to you? Because what you're telling me is that there might be something in the way, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that we need to explore that may be preventing us from truly getting the intent and maximizing the intent of these things that we put in place.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you brought that back around to the guidance piece because you made it clear like, hey, the community piece has that ability to be the piece, the sort of deciding piece when we get that right, along with the other two. But at
Mhm.
some point through that process, and that's kind of how I'm receiving it. It's more of a process as much as it is
Yeah.
maybe, let's say, just like all three, and then just hit all three at all different times. For me, like when you get to that guidance piece, the likelihood of you being receptive to that guidance will immediately determine how well you can even create the community in the first place, And so I love that you're able to help us see that is that from a guidance standpoint, it's great to have the people around that you need, but are you allowing them to even guide you? Are you willingly receiving what it is they're putting out there? Because that could be the biggest issue here, not the fact that you found the right people, not the fact that you've created the community and the environment and the situation you need to be successful, but for whatever reason, you're just not listening. You're just not taking back what it is people are throwing at you. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm just curious as well as to, I guess, from your own perspective, maybe how was there ever a time where you maybe didn't practice that the way that you're now obviously, you're obviously driving that kind of behavior?
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I have probably more examples than I'm willing to admit, to be totally honest. I mean, you could look at so many different experiences in athletics and personal life, in
Mhm.
spiritual life is a huge one. I know this isn't a spiritual
Yep.
podcast or show, but there are definitely areas of my life where I want to grow spiritually. And sometimes the hardest step to take is to actually embrace that guidance or community.
Mhm.
I would say that's probably typically the most difficult area of like to grow in because it's so inward all the
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
And I think that's really the key, like, especially from a coaching perspective. I know you probably have a lot of coaches listening to the show as well, is you could typically see someone who's maybe not see how they're maybe not fully bought into making the change, almost like sometimes we kind of get like captured or imprisoned, like we're almost comfortable, like we
Mhm.
kind of love the challenge, like the pain that we're in a way, like
Sure.
we don't really want to leave it behind.
Yep.
You could sometimes you could really isolate someone that might be in that type of position by really analyzing whether or not they're truly seeking out a guidance
Mhm.
mentor, coach of somehow, or the community piece, because those are typically the two areas. It's always easy to find some form of structure, training plan, whatever, right? But it's whether it's a mentor or it's peers that can really push you along. Those are typically the two areas that we resist the most when we're kind of quite honestly resisting the change.
Yep. 100%. And again, it's the two sides of this entire podcast is the growth piece in so many ways is so easy for us to speak to. And then when we actually get into the work around the readiness behind the growth, we slowly start to realize that we're actually pretty comfortable with the familiarity, even though we know it comes with some issues. We know it comes with our own, just inabilities to do certain things. We're actually, because it's familiar, because it's comfortable, and we've just gotten used to the same complaints and the same issues, we would just rather stay there and act like growth is this thing that we kind of want, we're kind of interested in, but
Yeah.
deep down we're not motivated yet. We're not motivated enough at least to change. And I
Yeah.
think that's such a powerful insight to consider anybody listening is like if you've been talking about it for a year now, and again, we're talking in February, and I always joke with audiences when I speak on stage, like January, hey, everyone's ready to change, right? And then March, it's like, why does the person in the mirror look exactly the same to the person in March last year? It's just like that's what it comes down to. We talk a great game, and we're all guilty of it. I'm not sitting here standing on my soapbox saying that Steve somehow has figured it out. I have not in any way, shape, or form. But the fact of the matter is, at the heart of it, how can we just get a little bit more honest with what we truly want and are willing to do about it? And that is where, when we step into that change part of this with that mindset of, hey, I think I'm willing to finally do something about it. It's like, okay, so now you finally might be receptive to some guidance, and cool. Let's step into that with some curiosity, and let's see where we go now that you're, for whatever reason, more receptive to the change.
I think that's so powerful, Steve. You've hit on so many different components that we could have a totally separate.
Right.
But the one thing that I just want to kind of double tap on that specific point that you made is this idea of finding the why, like finding the purpose, connecting to that. That's, I talk about that a lot in terms of helping these frontline leaders understand how to give people purpose and clarity to
Mhm.
create that engagement. But a great analogy to what you're talking about is the entrepreneurial journey, right? Like,
Right.
how many people have you talked to? Oh, man, I could never do that. Like, I would love to do it, but I could never do it.
Mhm.
And I experienced, I kind of wrestled with that for a while until I kind of jumped off the cliff, if you will, and
There you go.
finally did it. But
Yep.
one of the hardest things to do is sometimes, especially for yourself, when you don't have a first line supervisor giving you that purpose, is
Mhm.
figuring out how to create it.
Mhm.
And you absolutely nailed it. Sometimes having that mentor, having that coach really helps you do that. But at the end of the day, you are not going to grow if the pain that you have to go through in that growth journey is not as important as the reason why you want to go through that journey.
Yeah.
So if you can't create a compelling reason that's strong enough for you to pursue that process and go through that resistance, then it's probably not going to be worth it to you.
Yeah, and that's, again, you joked that we could come up with a whole nother conversation and give it another 7,500 episodes, and I'll bring you back and we'll do it again.
Let's do it.
But something that you're just saying here that I think is important to emphasize, that you and I are more than likely very used to experiencing, is that a lot of people will come into my world, and I'm curious to learn if it's the case in yours, but they think they already know what it is they need. And that is typically a huge red flag, believe it or not, in my world. It's just, if you've gotten this far with this assumption that you know the problem, therefore you know the solution, then whatever your ability to change you think it is actually much less, because you would rather stay in the lane and on the path that you've been on to this point, and you've decided to provide yourself some form of a diagnosis that is now suddenly going to be the key to whatever this growth is that you feel you're capable of. And that's the beauty of the work that we get to do, is that we open people's eyes to, like, hey, like, I appreciate that and I respect that. I do, but why don't you come over here and meet my friend Curiosity? You just let me
Yeah.
introduce you to Curiosity. Let me just sit down for 30, 45 minutes, ask you some questions, and suddenly you may see that there's something that either you don't know or there's something that is just brand new that had we not had this discussion, you wouldn't have ever been aware of it. And it's something that could have been right smack in front of you this whole time. You just not been looking at it, and I think that's what I love about this work. And again, I can bring it back all the way to the entrepreneurship journey is that I had that thing in front of me for like 2.5 years and
Yeah.
telling me like, go do it, go do it. And I didn't do it. And it took
Yeah.
just true acts of, and you talk about spirituality, true acts of God to like smack me over the head really hard and be like, okay, I get it. I get it now. I should go do it. I hear you, but that's a perfect example, as you're alluding to, is that sometimes we think it's like, hey, when I'm ready or the opportunity is going to present itself. And it's just like, no, actually, the opportunity has presented itself. You've just not been looking properly at it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a great point, and I definitely experienced that too. I think, we tend into a lot of different growth journeys or areas fall into kind of two categories for the most part. It's you're either problem focused, in other words, you know what your problem is, and you're focused on solving that problem, or you're married to a specific solution.
Mhm.
And I'm always looking for, I'm sure you are too, for those problem focused people, because a problem focused person, they want to create and they want to leverage the plan or the tactic or whatever it is that gets them through that problem.
Mhm.
You see this a lot in the fitness space. It's a really easy way to compare and contrast these two segments of people, right? There are people that may have we'll call it a certain type of body composition challenge they're looking to overcome or whatever. And then there are people that are bodybuilders or Olympic weightlifters or swimmers, right? Like your background.
Mhm.
And so I would argue each of those examples, that's being married to a specific kind of solution, right? So like if you're a swimmer, you're probably not going to be squatting 700 pounds,
Mhm.
right? And if you're a bodybuilder, you're probably not going to be the most buoyant and aerodynamic in the pool.
Right.
However, if you want to lose weight, right, there are certain types of solutions we can use to help you do that. It's probably not going to be doing super heavy bodybuilding, right? It's probably going to be a little bit more aerobic oriented.
Mhm.
So I kind of I love using fitness examples because it's such a great way to expose whether someone really just wants to marry themselves to a typical type of solution or if
Mhm.
they're actually focused on the problem and getting through that problem with whatever means is the best way to approach that problem for them.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's ideally, as we start to bring this to a close, it's like if having listened to the last 45 minutes as you sit here and you go, okay, so now what? Where the heck do I start with all of this? Because you guys have hit me with so many different things. I think what you're alluding to here is a fantastic place for anybody to start. It's like just sit and go, okay, what might be an area that you feel has been a problem, not this week, not this past month, but something that every time you think it's gone away, it comes back. It's like this thing that just for whatever reason you can't get over the hump, at least for a significant period of time. Identify what that thing is, and then maybe start to look at some of these components here that Craig is providing, like around, well, have I created the right structure for this? Am I getting the right kind of guidance around this? And do I have the right kind of community around whatever this thing is? And again, I don't want to speak for you so much, but at the same time, Craig, like as I'm sort of speaking through this, I'm curious, what would your addition to that be for someone maybe trying to figure out how to maybe create that greater level of engagement and maybe even a little bit more traction with whatever version of growth it is they're trying to get ready for?
No, absolutely. I think you hit it spot on. I'd encourage people to kind of take this process. In the military, when you go through mission planning, the number one thing you do, we kind of about it already, is you analyze the situation, which primarily encompasses doing some enemy analysis, right? So understand who you are, what challenges you typically have in your growth journeys, and understand the problem that you want to overcome. From there, in the military, when we execute operations, almost always all the supporting efforts take place before the main effort takes place. So before you commit yourself on this intensive journey of growth, which whether it's truly significant to you or you're just starting out and trying to take a small step, growth is always intensive.
Mhm.
Focus on putting some of these supporting efforts in place so that they empower you when you really put your effort on going from A to B in whatever area of your life that you're trying to grow.
I love it. You guys call it a callback, right? In the military. Am I getting that right? Am I getting this
Oh,
right?
there's so many different
But no, I think
every
we had a guy. His name's Jason Silva. It was about 4 or 5 months ago now, and he articulated the whole 45, 50 minute conversation. He says it's something we use. It's called callback, and it's just a way to summarize everything that we've talked about. And but I think that's perfect. What you've just done here, man, is like just giving people this little 1 minute, like, okay, I think I have it. I think I have my little blueprint, my little plan that I can go away with and execute and just kind of see how it goes and give it some time. Trust it for a little while. And if you get unsure about anything, what a great reason to come back and just re-listen to the episode all over again. So for
exactly.
me, I think, Craig, that's a great way to sort of bring this to an end, is just giving people that insight. But before I let you go completely, please, where can we find out more about you and just learn about all the things that you're offering people today?
Yeah, absolutely. Check me out on LinkedIn. It's just linkedin.com/Craig-Coyle. And if you're interested more in what we do for organizations, you can check us out at operationlead.com.
Beautiful. Craig, this has been an absolute delight. I was looking forward to it, and it absolutely, went far above and beyond my expectations. So, like I said, that offer to come back 75, 100 episodes from now, I think that would be about 2026 December time, something like that.
Perfect.
So let's put it on the calendar now. I'll have you back. But brother, this has been a delight. I appreciate all your insights and just best of luck with everything in your world moving forward.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And my thanks again to Craig for joining us on this episode. So much valuable content. I really appreciate just all the many elements to Craig's story and his experience and how he's able to weave those into useful insights for yourselves and obviously in the work that he's doing today. But something I really want to speak to that wasn't necessarily something that he alluded to as part of his services today. It was something that kind of organically came out, and it was that notion of critically capturing our thoughts. It's something that I myself have made a priority for 2025. I don't do it in the moment as well as I would like to, but I have this sort of end of the day audit that I'm using now. It's my own little thing that I've come up with, but it takes about 3, maybe 5 minutes if I'm in a very insightful mood, let's say, at the end of the day. But just simply being able to take the time to take stock. And I think any way you can do that throughout a day, again, if you're not doing it at all right now, what a great place to start. Just simply picking one moment in the day, every day, for as many days as you can in a row, to be critical about what it is you're thinking, what it is that you've noticed about yourself, and just simply putting it down on paper, putting it in your phone, and having that ability then to look back a month from now, 6 months from now, and just see nothing but this huge compilation of insights that have come from you. Because there's going to be something that you think about today that if you weren't to make a note of it right now, 2 months from now, it will be simply a distant memory and something that you may think of again 3, 5, 7, 9 months from now, but by that point it may be too late. So the question becomes is how can you create that habitual routine to where you are making sure you're documenting these kind of thoughts as they come to you. And if you can't do it as they come to you, then to at least circle back at the end of a day or the beginning of a day and just take note then. Again, don't try to figure this out immediately. Don't try to stop your entire day around how you can capture your critical thoughts in the moments. But simply start small. Take a step towards that today, and how might you utilize that and the benefit. Think about the benefit of capturing that kind of insight moving forwards. But for now, again, one final thank you to Craig for joining us. And again, as always, my thanks to you, the listener or the viewer. If you're watching us on YouTube, we continue to grow on YouTube, so it's super exciting. I'm becoming more and more aware of the fact that I have to look into the camera and care about what I'm wearing, all these sort of things. But at the same time, as always, folks, please take the time to be sharing these episodes. If you found it useful and insightful, I have no doubt that somebody else in your world will as well. Subscribe to the show. Make sure you're giving us a rating of 5 stars. I see no reason to give us any less than 5 stars. And as always, best of luck with anything and everything you've got going on in your world. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.